Alright guys, so let's take a look at the results after running the engine builder engine on the dyno as well as the box stock 206. So I did run the engine builder engine first, and I ran that at about 4:26 p.m. And then I did a break-in on the box stock engine, and then I did the dyno pulls on that engine at 5:09. So there's a little over 40 minutes in between the two tests. But that's pretty much as good as I can get, guys. So we'll go ahead and open up the engine builder engine test first. Let's get some of this stuff off the screen. Let's go ahead and zoom in on the 3 dyno pulls. I did 3 dyno pulls on each engine, and we'll just go ahead and pick whichever one has the most horsepower to use as our reference. So let's go ahead and add our horsepower and torque channels here. Looks like this middle pole had the most horsepower, so let's zoom in on it. Right there. Okay, so looking at this, engine builder engine peak horsepower came in at 6.82. Let's jot this down. So engine builder engine 6.82. We want to know what RPM this came in at as well. So let's throw RPM in here. Peak horsepower came in at 5245. You know, we need to add our lambda channel. And our lambda value was 91. 91. Alright, let's see what the torque was doing. So peak torque on the engine builder engine, 7.93. And that came in at 3256 with a lambda of 0.89. Alright, so there's the engine builder engine. You know, I've got the setup that I measured the engine out up here. So if you didn't see the last video, on the engine builder engine, the intake lash was 6 thousandths, the exhaust lash was 7 thousandths, float height was 885 thousandths. I ran the needle clip in position 2, airspeed screw was 2.75 turns out, and the ignition timing was 45 degrees. So let's go ahead, let's take a look at the box stock engine. Go ahead and zoom in on our 3 dyno poles. Looks like the last one had the most horsepower, so we'll zoom in again on the last one. Alright, peak horsepower came in at 6.89. Oh, would you look at that, guys? I think the box stock engine beat out the souped up, blueprinted, expensive engine builder engine right out of the box. So 6.89. And you know what? I swear this was 8.2. We'll go back and double check. 6.89 RPM. $56.59. So quite a bit further out in the RPM range. And lambda was 0.92. Alright, what was our torque? Alright, peak torque 7.75. So a little behind the engine builder engine on torque. RPM, that came in at 37.55. And our lambda 0.93. Okay, so looking at this, it looks like the box stock engine had just a little bit more horsepower than the engine builder engine, but then the engine builder engine came through with a little more torque than the box stock engine. You know, that's probably carburation, because these things like to be a little richer on the bottom, and the engine builder engine was definitely richer on the bottom. So that's probably due to the float height. And like I mentioned in the other video, this is a high float height, especially right out of the box. I'm probably going to back this off to 890 thousandths. So that might richen me up a little bit. And then I'm going to turn this out, which would actually lean it a little bit, but this is still going to get turned out to 1 1/4. And you know, unfortunately, I did not make those changes and run the box stock engine on the dyno. So you know what I'll do is I'll actually set this box stock engine up just like I would for a customer. I'll get the float height adjusted, I'll get the airspeed screw adjusted, and then I'll put some intake lash and some exhaust lash based upon the measurements I took of the cam. And then we'll go ahead and run this dyno, or this engine on the dyno again, and see if we can get any better numbers down here. But I mean, in reality, engine builder engine versus this box stock engine, I mean, it's essentially the same engine, and we noticed that in the last video with the cams. So yeah, I mean, this, I do have my opinions. Some people may not like them, but this kind of data right here just kind of firms up my opinion on a lot of this blueprinting magic that these guys are out here doing. But there's the results, guys. And you know, for those that are interested, you know, let me show you these math channels. I get a lot of questions about these math channels. So here in Ray Studio, you can configure your own math channel. So here I've got my load cell. So this is the formula I use to calculate the load cell. It outputs 5,000 millivolts. So this is the formula I use to chop that down so that it reads in pounds. Here's how I calculate the torque. So it basically just takes the load cell reading and divides it by the gear ratio I have on the dyno to come up with the torque. And then the horsepower is the load cell torque that we just calculated times the RPM divided by 5252. And that's how you get those results. And you know, I'm going to go back to the other test real quick just to make sure. Was the middle one. Yeah, 682, not 685. Just for transparency, just to show you, I've got the same math channels on this test. There's the load cell formula like we saw in the last one. Here's how I calculate the torque divided by the ratio I've got on the dyno. And then horsepower, load cell torque times RPM divided by 5252. So there it is, guys. In my opinion, the only way you're going to get a good engine is if you get a good one straight from Briggs. And obviously keeping it maintained, you should be good to go. So in the next one, we'll go ahead and set this box stock engine up just like I would for something I would race. And then we'll test it and see if we can beat out this engine builder engine. So there it is, guys. As always, appreciate you for tuning in. Plan your race, race your plan. Have a good time at the track.